As we continue coverage of Azerbaijan's major attack on Armenia, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has raised the death toll on the Armenian side to 135. To unpack this week's events, I'm joined by the director of the Regional Studies Center, Richard Giragosian. So Richard Giragosian, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
To start off, there is a lot of speculation about the US's sudden engagement in what's going on between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Many observers now really believe that the United States brokered this ceasefire, which is currently holding. The US Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, has called Pashinyan, has called on Aliyev to cease hostilities. And moreover, the US has recognized the attack was on Armenia proper and that civilian targets were hit. What are the US's intentions in the region now, in your opinion? What do you think about all this talk about sudden US engagement?
Well, as a person who worked and lived in Washington for 20 years before moving to Armenia, the easy short answer is their intentions and their strategy remains unclear. But it's a promising start. And what we see is a US return to the region, a re-engagement in issues. And what's interesting and notable is the contrast with the Trump administration during the 2020 war, when the US seemed to be fumbling for a response that never came. Under the Biden administration, there's a much more dynamic, robust effort. Having said that, I really think the key is not the US, but the European Union in terms of both Brussels' role as a facilitator in bilateral Armenian-Azerbaijani talks, but also in terms of developing post-war stability. And it's the EU that we should be focused more on. However, the American agenda is both welcome, especially with a new US ambassador coming to Armenia, and we should actually not only expect, but demand more.
And another big announcement was that the Speaker of the US House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, will pay a surprise visit to Armenia. I'm wondering, what was your reaction to this development?
Well, I was pleased, but what's most significant for Armenia is Congresswoman Pelosi coming to Armenia as a Speaker of the House is precedent-setting. It's the highest level of congressional engagement in the region ever. The second important factor here is the Speaker is not going to Azerbaijan or Georgia. This is very much a demonstration and display of American frustration with the Aliyev regime in Azerbaijan, which needs to be noted. What we also see, Congresswoman Pelosi has been a consistent, long-standing supporter of Armenia and Armenian issues, just as Congresswoman Jackie Speer, who's coming with her, has a notable record of support. So I do think this is going to raise the stature of Armenia within Washington as much as the US enhanced role in the region.
You mentioned the European Union. The EU Special Representative to the South Caucasus, Toivo Klar, was in the country, but there are some that are arguing that the EU may be losing leverage with regards to the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. Some argue this is because of the major gas deal that was struck between Azerbaijan and the EU. Others say that the EU is taking a mediator role, which complicates what it can do. What do you think about the EU's role with regards to this week's events?
Well, to add an honest answer, I think what's more important is the perception of the EU in Azerbaijan. I think Azerbaijan was very much encouraged and emboldened to attack Armenia because Azerbaijan feels it has leverage over the European Union because of this recent gas contract, where Azerbaijan will supply the European market with natural gas as an alternative to Russian gas supplies. This has greatly emboldened and encouraged the Azerbaijanis to be more aggressive. What's also important beyond the perception is the reality that for the European Union, it is part of the new calculation where Azerbaijan has gained strategic significance. Having said that, I do think the European Union has already been much more active in Armenia and in the region since the 2020 war. And what we see in Brussels is an important new process, and it's not mediation. It's not making the mistakes of the OSCE Minsk group, it's rather facilitation. It's facilitating a platform for engagement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the process is much deeper than ever before. For example, there's staff-level preparation. Hikmet Hajiev, a senior advisor to President Aliyev, and Armen Grigoryan, the Secretary of the National Security Council, collaborate and prepare together in terms of each summit meeting that's held between the leaders of both countries. This has been missing in the past. And there is an important element of the need to return to diplomacy and rule out the force of arms. And I do think Azerbaijan's recent attack has made it much more isolated, both in terms of the international community, but also within the European Union itself.
And there is a lot of talk within the Armenian public at the moment about Armenia's membership of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which Armenia is a member of. It's a Russian-led military alliance. The head of the organization delayed his visit to Armenia to next week, which caused dismay on social media, for example. It also announced that it would not send peacekeepers to the country. I'm wondering, what do you think about the future relationship between Armenia and this military alliance of which it is a member?
I think there's neither a future nor a relationship between Armenia and the Collective Security Treaty Organization. And what I'm referring to is, in many ways, the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, shouldn't have even bothered to come, because their words, their actions are rather meaningless. And in fact, even in terms of military and legal aspects, whether it's the Russian peacekeepers deployed to Artsakh or the Russian border guards in southern Armenia, they have nothing to do with the CSTO organization. And I think Prime Minister Pashinyan's call for invoking the security promises and guarantees only exposes the weakness and the emptiness of that relationship. But at the same time, the bigger challenge, well beyond the CSTO, is Russia is now completely exposed as a danger. It's a challenge of being an unreliable partner for Armenia. That's quite a different challenge than a predictable enemy. An unreliable friend is a new challenge, and that's what Russia now stands out as for Armenia.
There is a perception that there is a security vacuum at the moment due to Russia's actions or due to Russia's recent defeats in the east of Ukraine, in the Kharkiv Oblast, and that there is a possibility of other forces trying to fill that vacuum, namely the United States. This is what some people are talking about. What do you think about this perception that there is a security vacuum being left by Russia?
Well, in a general sense, there is a security vacuum. I don't share the reasons why, but I would articulate the fact that Azerbaijan's timing of its attack was very much rooted in both perception and reality of Russian weakness. Russia is both distracted and overwhelmed by its losses and setbacks in Ukraine, creating therefore a vacuum. But it's certainly not the US nor NATO that's capable of filling the vacuum. And I do see a danger here where I'm worried about Turkey and I'm worried about Azerbaijan dangerously overconfident in exploiting the security vacuum. But I do think overall, it's only a question of time when Russia will be a much bigger challenge. For example, I do see a storm on the horizon where no matter what happens in Ukraine, we will face an angry, isolated Russia seeking revenge, a backlash against all of its neighbors, from Moldova to Central Asia, demanding more submission in the near abroad. And I think that's the coming challenge to Armenia, where Russia cracks down on its neighbors and tries to restrict Armenia's options elsewhere.
And finally, Richard, Armenia's United Nations representative was warning delegates in New York that Azerbaijan may be preparing further larger attacks, and there is a real worry that what we saw this week was just a small snippet of what's to come. Others say that this may have actually just been a tactical blunder on the part of Azerbaijan. I'm wondering what you think.
Well, let's look at it first from a diplomatic point of view. The Armenian ambassador to the United Nations in New York impressed me and did a very good job diplomatically. At the same time, I do think Armenia has a diplomatic advantage stemming from the stark contrast between a struggling democracy that was defeated in 2020 by an authoritarian regime in Azerbaijan. If we look more notably, Azerbaijan has been ruled by a father and son dynasty for over a quarter of a century. And the international community cannot easily ignore that limitation. And if we look militarily, I would say the real problem for all of us, or for the world, is there's no deterrence. No one and nothing is preventing Azerbaijan from attacking Armenia and Artsakh. And this is the problem, the lack of deterrence. However, militarily, the cost is much higher on Azerbaijan than they expected. The loss of life, the performance of the Armenian military responding and counterattacking after the offensive was much better than many expected, and the loss of life on the Azerbaijani side was a bit of a wake-up call in terms of showing the price to pay for relying on military means.
Well, Richard Giragosian, very insightful. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And continue following CivilNet.